Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is a frontline update for the Ukraine war for the 5th of January 2025. I'm using Andrew Perpetua's map today. Big props to Andrew and his team for putting this together. My map, I just need to do a fix that JR has given me to do on the mapping, and I'll do that later. So my map that I use to synthesize several mappers will be available again after I do that. But in the meantime, I just want to, quickly go through the front line. Goodness me, it's all happening. So there is the Ukrainian counterattack that's taking place up in the Kursk Oblast, but the Russians are giving it a good go everywhere else. I haven't obviously done a mapping update for some time, so the Russians will have made some pretty extensive gains across the front line in a number of areas. I would like to get back to doing like daily mapping. Yeah, that would be nice, wouldn't it? And show what Syriac map says on a daily basis. I'm not showing their mapping at the moment in the individual tweets because there's so many that come out a day that when I do 5-day updates, it's not so useful for me to show those. But I do have a number of things to say. First of all, we'll go to a general synopsis of what's going on with the Russian attacks recently. Euromaidan Press says, faced with relentless Ukrainian drone strikes, Russian forces shifted away from tank assaults and adopted new military tactics. Now Russian troops are dispersing their infantry units as smaller units are harder to target than long columns of vehicles, and that's coming from a Forbes article as well. I've talked about this previously, that the advantages things like unarmored vehicles and buggies and quads and motorcycles have is that they are dispersed, they're harder to hit, you have to use more ordnance to take them out, and actually they do bring about an advantage for the Russians in some ways. The disadvantages are that they are unarmored, and if you hit a mine or if you are hit by shrapnel or directly by a bit of ordnance, you're in trouble. Okay, so swings and roundabouts, but the Russians are adapting. We've seen this before, off and on, with their changes like this that we've been told about previously, but they still do generally go for big attacks with large columns of vehicles. I wonder whether part of this is that they have, well, a lot of this is going to be that they've run out of a lot of these vehicles, and so this is going to be dressed up as a kind of like an adaptation, but it's kind of a forced adaptation in a sense. Okay, so I spoke to you in the breaking news update this morning about this counter-offensive or counter-attack, really, in the Kursk sector. It is taking place potentially in a number of places. The main thrust appears to be up here in the northeastern area towards Bolshoye Soldatskoye there, and you can see that this yellow area of this is Andrew Perpetua's mapping update that he did about 5 hours ago. He said it's very conservative, so there could be far deeper changes than this, and it's going to be fascinating to see his mapping tomorrow. But this whole area is now a grey zone that was under Russian control, and there's potentially a change over here in that. Well, the Ukrainians are potentially attacking over in this area of Leonidovo. Also, we are hearing mention this area down here around Makhnovka, where the Russians have lost a large number of people there. If actually we look at the mapping recently, we've had Ukrainians being supposedly in control of this area due to the fact that the Russians have previously been attacking with drones, and now it's turned into a grey zone. So that looks like the Russians are attacking into there. So I'm not quite sure, but there definitely have been some losses for the Russians in that area. I think that was an area that Zelensky himself talked about in terms of those Russian losses. And the Russians have been very active up in this area, trying to get towards Malaya Lokhnia, which is here, from the north up here previously, but now more consistently from the east and from the west. They've actually taken some land in this area, but it has been incredibly painful for them. They've lost a lot of North Koreans there. Now, the Russians also engaged in counterattacks in the Kursk sector last night, apparently huge attacks. So we're going to go through a whole bunch of different claims. I ran through no reports. 10 hours ago, you can see there for the breaking news update, I ran through what he was saying in terms of all of these attacks, Bolshoye, Soldatskoye, lots of visual confirmation of columns of Ukrainian vehicles and armor moving through this area, potentially taking control of Berdin, which is a village around this area here. I think that could be it there. That's that there. Berdin. So they could be in control of that. There is definitely visual evidence of them fighting in that village, but when that was recorded, I don't know. So Ukrainians doing a lot of attacking. They do appear to be using an awful lot of electronic warfare, which is why, almost certainly why you are seeing these columns. You wouldn't have these columns if there were enemy drones able to pick you off willy-nilly, like we have seen the Russians do across the front lines for months and months and months. The Ukrainians appear to be able to pick off their armor at ease, and that's why we were talking about the adaptation just now. So Andriy Yermak this morning said, Kursk, good news, Russia's getting what it deserves. Russian sources claim there's an ongoing offensive coming from Leonidova. That's what I said as well. More visual confirmation. Hard to know what the successes are. Russian aviation also active there. Russian channels reporting heavy fighting near Berdin, as we just mentioned. Serhiy Stenenko, a Ukrainian activist, has said that reports that at the same time Russians are attacking towards the state border of Ukraine in the Sumy region. No significant advancement, probably deep reconnaissance groups, and we know that they sort of killed a brother and sister in a vehicle 5 kilometers from the front line, or who lived 5 kilometers from the front line, and that happened yesterday. Ukrainian forces, though, back to Kursk, have launched an offensive in the Kursk region, according to Kotinok, a Russian military blogger. Enemy advancing near Sudzha toward Berdino, which is Berdin, Bolshoye, Soldatskoye, and Pushkarnoye, but is sustaining losses. The situation remains tense. No clear indication of the main attack direction. Some people already saying that the Rebar, indeed, saying that the Ukrainians actually could be doing a diversion here. So attempt against the backdrop of the Ukrainian armed forces' attempted offensive in the Kursk region, there had been talks since the morning that the attack in the direction of Bolshoye Soldatskoye is a diversionary one, and the main blow could be in another area. This is supported by the fact that the enemy, Ukrainians, clearly did not use the forces that they had been transferring to the Sumy region for several weeks to form a strike group. In particular, over the past few days, personnel have been actively transferred via the ring roads in Kharkiv. Equipment with installed electronic warfare systems have also been spotted there. So it could be a diversionary attack. They could have a main thrust somewhere else. Euromaidan Press says Ukraine has taken advantage of a Russian troop rotation to push on the Kursk front, said Andrei Kramarov. He warned against expecting significant gains, but emphasized that it could be important for securing territory to leverage in possible peace talks. So there are some Russians saying they're going to go all the way to get the nuclear power plant up here. Highly unlikely that the Ukrainians would have the reserves to be able to do that. I don't think that's remotely plausible. But I think the Ukrainians do understand that Kursk is an incredibly important area to keep hold of, more important than not losing area on their own eastern front further to the south in occupied Ukraine. Or along the contact line there. What else do we note? In the direction of Bolshoye Soldatskoye, Ukraine has landed 70 people in the forest. The guys are working. Many should not run ahead of the locomotive. There is a lot of disinformation. The situation is difficult, said a Russian channel. Another one saying that there's no need to panic and sow discouragement in the Kursk region. These are military actions. Here it happens that somewhere we are advancing, somewhere we are retreating in order to win a big battle. According to Russian sources, Ukrainian units are also attacking towards Tetkino. So we might see, if we go over to the west, some activity around here. Tetkino is this town just bordering bordering Ukraine, but also the same river as it comes down. Ukraine took control of the land to the west of the same river there, between their own border and the river itself, just in a small area there. But that could be another area where the Ukrainians are active. And up until now, though, there's a fog of war. Yeah, Ukrainian units have landed. Russians have confirmed Ukrainian units have landed in the forest area south of Berdin. The situation is obviously going to be very dynamic there. What they've captured is as yet unclear. The Russian MOD admitted that the Ukrainians were active in Kursk to counter advancing Russian forces in the Kursk direction. Ukrainian troops launched a counterattack around 9 a.m. Moscow time, they said. And another Russian source, Don't Stop War, says now you can say they didn't come in then, but they came in now. Or you said they took it, but they just came in. They didn't come into Suja for a whole week either. I'm not quite sure 100% what is going on with that. So on and so forth. We're going to come down to more recent claims, because most of that is what I said this morning, including that the Russians are unable to use drones, and so reconnaissance is having to be done through binoculars because the electronic warfare is so powerful for the Ukrainians. Russian channels confirm that there is Ukrainian presence in both Berdin and the adjacent Novosotnitsky, which, if we look back at the map, that's going to be this place there, as far as I can work out. So the Ukrainians are further on than what Andrew Perpetua's as of yet changed, although that's going to be dynamic as mentioned. Akhmat Battalion Apti Laudanov is saying, hey, the enemy tried to break through, failed. A significant amount of enemy equipment, Ukrainian equipment, was destroyed. Ours are fighting heroically. He always says stuff like that. But I think the Ukrainians will have taken some considerable losses. This is going to be difficult for them to do. As of now, 42 combat clashes have occurred in Kursk. Said this was 5 hours ago. 12 still ongoing, according to Ukrainian General Staff. Here's evidence of a M1 Abrams being evacuated. Might be in a bit of trouble. But that's coming out of the area there. Now, the Korn Group shares footage of Ukrainian units inside a village here in Kursk. They asked for a comment about Kursk. We're advancing, they have claimed. And then someone from the Ada Osman is a source that we've heard many times from up and down the front. He's been positioned in a number of places, including Bakhmut, Chasiv Yar, so on and so forth. Anyway, he said, the enemy launched a mechanized assault. So this is the Russians launching an assault in the Kursk region in panic after losing positions to our advance. Their equipment was redirected to the flanks but destroyed near our border. But we have losses too, so that it's worth remembering that. Rebar have then, that's the part about the diversion. Russian drones attacking a Ukrainian column and advancing towards Russian position. At first, a mine-clearing vehicle leading the column is targeted. After that, the column following the mine-clearing vehicle can also be seen. The leading tank is struck. Damage is unclear as the aftermath isn't shown. So obviously there is electronic warfare, but then if the Russians are able to use fiber optic drones, then they are going to overcome that resistance from electronic warfare. Or it's not always, it depends what frequencies they're operating on, and sometimes you can overcome those challenges just with conventional FPV drones and whatnot. So Ukrainians will be losing vehicles as well. The Ukrainians at the moment are, and apparently, this lots of video footage coming out at the moment, the Ukrainians are striking Kursk with drones, and I presume that is a city of Kursk, which is further up here. And as mentioned, there are rumours that Ukrainians will be trying to take a nuclear power plant. And as I have said, I think that's insanely unlikely. Now, before the counter-offensive, there were some pushes and shoves in the area of Kursk with Kruglenkoye and Novoivanivka villages showing some signs of Ukrainian counterattacks that were successful. So this is over in this area there. and Kruglenkoye just over there. So we've got Russian attacks thrusting through there, but Ukrainians had success in regaining some territory around there. But this did come from just before the new year. Now we're up to the 5th. So, some things I haven't shown you for a long time, but the Ukrainians have pushed back in these areas. The Russians took some heavy casualties in Kruglenkoye. I think a lot of North Koreans there, but have then been subsequently pushing back. And here's another one from just before the new year as well, where the Ukrainians were having some success in Mariivka, which is over in this direction near the road up here. Here, Mariivka there. So the Ukraine is pushing back there previously. And actually that is shown here by Andrew Perpetua's blue shading there, which was previously grey zone. And then the Ukrainians now control this. And we know that because the Russians are hitting this controlled area with FPV drones. So that is signifying what Grayskull is saying there. And then a couple of other places. Berdina, this is where there's activity today. This is January the 5th. So this is Grayskull already saying that, the Ukrainians have been pushing the Russians back. Grey zone in that area potentially, or Ukrainian controlled. Don't know, it's fairly dynamic. And then Makhnovka as well. As I've said, there's been a lot of fighting around there. The Ukrainians saying that they've captured that. And this is the area on the eastern side of the sector, further down here, where here it is, Makhnovka. We go back in time on Andrew Perpetua's mapping. That's what it is today. And as I've said, there's been quite a bit of fighting around there and some pretty heavy Russian losses. Grayskull saying that Ukrainians had actually taken some area back there, but that's going back to January the 1st. And then we move on really from Kursk to other areas. This will be incredibly dynamic. The Russians will be attriting the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are going to be losing equipment and personnel in doing this, but the idea, I guess, is to allow them to regain some of the ground that they've either lost, regain some ground they've lost, or retake or take ground that they haven't yet taken previously, and secure their control of this area in order to have it as a serious bargaining chip come January the 20th and beyond. I would hope that they'll be able to take some other areas into the Russian territory in order to have more to bargain with. When we go to the west and we come along to the two areas in the Kharkiv Oblast just south of Belgorod, and Belgorod's been pretty active in terms of drone attacks over the last few nights and probably missile attacks as well. We can see that, well, if we rewind the mapping over some time, there's been no movement in control here, but there are some claims that the Russians are pushing there. So this is from January the 3rd. A couple of days ago, Tim White had said, not good news from Kharkiv, where Ukrainian commanders report lost positions in different areas. In the north, Russia stormed Vovchansk with some success. Further east, heavy fire hit Ukrainian defenses in the Zherezhove and Dvorichnaya and Krylyakivka districts. And that's actually further down on the front line down here. So you've got, where are we? In Kupiansk area. Yeah, so my goodness, it looks quite a bit different to Kupiansk. Up here, Dvorichnya, around there where they've got across the Oskil River. But yeah, no change in the mapping around these Kharkiv areas, but it could be, as you can see with the red arrows here from Andrew Perpetua, the Russians are trying to push back there. That's an area where the Ukrainians have gained more stability and have pushed back the Russians marginally over time, because the Russians in this area have been diverted to the Kursk defense there. But it could be that now with the North Koreans in operation in this region, the Russians are able to push some of their troops back to where they originally were and continue those offensive operations. Konstantin today has said, so he's someone that appears often on Andrew Perpetua's live streams as a Ukrainian. He says Russia launched massive assault overnight in the Kursk axis. So that's the Russians assaulting in the Kursk axis. That's what I was saying. It's not just the Ukrainians, or at least it was the Ukrainians attacking today, but the Russians attacked last night, he says. My good friend's unit has identified 32 armoured vehicles on their axis, 10 of them destroyed. Specifically, his team also killed 20 Russian soldiers, with many more wounded and taken care of by artillery and other FPV teams. So some success in repelling the Russian attack last night. And as mentioned, drones are active in Kursk as well. Okay, when we come further down though, if we look at Dvorichna around here, we have, if we go back in time on Andrew's map, I wonder if we can see, so the Russians getting across the Oskil River as it comes down here. So if you see that bluff, that broadly is to the west of the river. You can see the river meandering, the Oskil River, and the Russians have been able to get across it over the last sort of 3 weeks or so, and then taking control over some of Dvorichna. That was what Tim White was talking about. That is worrying for me personally, but they seem to have been unable to advance too much further after doing so. Then when we come on further to the south, we have the Pischany sector, what I call the Pischany sector, where the Russians have got to the Oskil River further, moving to the west there. We go back in time. Let's look over the last sort of week. We have the Russians making some marginal advances around Lazova and here Senkova near the river, but not too much else to report. So that's good news there. Ukrainians pushing back around Ryarodka there by the looks of it, according to Andrew, over the last couple of days, fighting back a Russian attack there. So they're countering each other in that area. There are some claims that the Ukrainians have pushed back a little bit in Makivka. This is, I'm just going to close Kursk down. This is coming from, and it is from January the 4th, so yesterday. Pro-Ukrainian channel reports multiple gains near Bilahorivka, which we'll come to later or shortly, and Makivka as well. So just south of Makivka, there's a crossroads there in Makivka. Just diagonally to the left of there's a crossroads. So somewhere around here, the Ukrainians might have countered and regained some ground there, but that's not showing up on Andrew's mapping. And we have some pushing back by the Ukrainians around Ivanivka here, although that has become grey zone, so the Russians pushing on. So if we go back to sort of 23rd of last month, the Russians are pushing on in the Terny area up to the Zherebets River here, and these water features that come down by Terny, Yampolivka, and down to Torska. Let's just make sure that's a little bit larger there, and you can see the gains that they are making, moving into Ukrainian land there. You can see here lots of Ukrainian shelling of the Russians there. Russian BMP destroyed. Ukrainian tank engaging there. Ukrainian drone attack. So it's really active in that whole area. And then over the other side of the water feature here, and that's a little bit worrying. The Russians are active at Ivanivka, and the Ukrainians pushing back there, putting up some resistance, as you'd like to see. But wondering how have they got round to the north? They've got across that. But that's where there's quite a bit of activity at the moment. We come further to the south. Grayskull was talking about how the Ukrainians had retaken some positions in Bilahorivka. However, we go to what Grayskull was saying. This is quite a different map to what Andrew Perpetua had. So you can see here the top of the chalk quarry at the bottom of the map there. If we go to Andrew's map, you've got the chalk quarry here, the top of it there, and there's that kind of weird circular bit, which is there, that weird circular bit, for want of a better word. But it's quite a different map there, because it looks like the Ukrainians have retaken some land all the way over here. But actually, Andrew doesn't have that under Russian control or even in the grey zone. The Ukrainians are all the way over here. So that's a really different mapping interpretation of what Grayscale has. So I don't know quite what to make of that. And the Russians pushing forward in some of these areas of Nokomiak. In fact, does that look like it's turned from Russian control to grey zone there? Recently, so it could be that the Russians haven't had that success as much as they wanted there, and Ukrainians might well have control of some area there that he had previously mapped as Russian control. Sometimes it's not that the Ukrainians have counterattacked, but it's the evidence to come out that actually the Russians aren't in control of that. Control of fields is very difficult to work out, right? These are just fields with tree lines. So really what Andrew does often is work out who is shelling who. And you can tell that by certain shelling patterns. In times past, when there was a real asymmetry between the fire rate of Russia and Ukraine, you could tell that Russia was shelling an area if it was absolutely shellacked, as Andrew would say. And that heavy shelling would be a sign that it was the Russians doing the shelling. And if it was light shelling, it was more likely to be the Ukrainians. And certain FPV drone footage, you kind of know who's producing that FPV drone footage and whatnot. And sometimes you're like, oh, we thought one side controlled these fields, but actually they weren't in control, or the other side are in control, or whatever. So these things can flip around, not because there are counterattacks, but just changes of interpretation. Then we come down to the Bakhmut area, and here let's do a bit of rewinding. So you've got Chaziv Yar here, and the Russians across the canal that comes up here, and Kalinivka. The Russians have got across the canal here and are attacking into the north of Chaziv Yar. So actually over time, so we go back to the 21st, it hasn't changed that much. What has changed, interestingly, they made some gains there, and then is like actually the Ukrainians have more robust control over some of this grey zone, which is good news, but the Russians getting further into the north of Chaziv Yar. That hasn't really changed that much over the last few days. Report from Null Reports yesterday, south of Chaziv Yar, Ukrainian forces managed to push Russians out of an important forest strip west of the Donetsk Canal. Russians will now have to re-establish a bridgehead on that side. So this is as the canal comes south of Chaziv Yar and sort of doglegs around. And it's this area of forestry that the Ukrainians have retaken. So that's probably this area there. I don't know that there's no change there, according to Andrew Perpetua. The Russians having control over this part of the road that comes over the canal. So the canal is here. It doglegs around there. No report says the Ukrainians have retaken that. Both mappers agree that the Russians are down that road there. Oops, if I get that back up, there's that road as it comes across. A thinner area of control with no reports there. Interesting that you've got this whole area over here as larger grey zone, as according to both mappers there. So this area here, the other side of the canal, still contested by the looks of it. Now, Poulet Volant, the French mapper that uses various sources, including Andrew Perpetua, has his interpretation of all of these places. We're going to go to Bakhmut here and Chaziv Yar first, and just have a look at where the Russians are pushing. So that's to the north of Chaziv Yar, and the Ukrainians pushing back in that forest area that we were just talking about then, and retaking the ground there. So the yellow shaded area is what the Ukrainians have retaken, and then the Russians still kind of haven't really moved over the last few days in that northern area, but that's where they're focusing. But somewhat stable, which is good news in Chaziv Yar. Then when we come further to the south, we come then to Toretsk and New York, with the Russians pushing up this railway line in New York area there, and then along the railway line around Druzhba, they're actually pushing right through into the middle of Toretsk. So we rewind some time on Andrew's map. It's not massively changed. There is more gain more robust control for the Russians along here, and then in the central part of Turetsk, we see the changes there, and they're sort of filling in areas here as well. But yeah, I mean, Turetsk is basically done for, right? The Ukrainians don't really control it in any significant way at all. We look at here, Poulet-Valon's map, you can see that the Russians are just pushing bloody everywhere around here, up and everywhere. So yeah, really challenging for the Ukrainians there. And then when we come down to the Pokrovsk area, you can see that the Russians are trying to encircle Pokrovsk. There's no fighting in the center of Pokrovsk, but there are sort of worrying signs from Pokrovsk. I was just contacted by Zhenya today. Pokrovsk direction, the enemy tried to knock us out of Lysivka, which is here. So you've got a number of places. Let's put these on the map because you're going to be talking about a number of places here. The enemy tried to knock us out of Lysivka, but something went wrong. They're now left with the central part and the western part along the pond. So there you go, along the pond and the central part, the western part. So it didn't go too well for the Russians there. Then he talks about Zelenya, which is here. And I think this is that there's a main sort of Ukrainian defensive line, the fortifications along here, that's helping out to keep the Russians at bay. And they've been trying to get around them and come up to the south of Pokrovsk and go for this encircling move. But talking about Zelenya here, the fight for that is ongoing. If the enemy catches this village, they will go straight to Chunshina, and only then our Cossacks will have to retreat to hold the main road through Novopavlivka and Nativka. So that's here and there. So this is holding out to stop the Russians breaking through. I presume there are fortifications there that's kind of, I guess if they break through there, then they're kind of broken through the main Ukrainian line. So this is a really important place, is what I imagine he's saying here. In the direction of Zvirovo, the enemy, so where are we talking about there? I'll just try and find that. Give me 2 ticks. Yeah, here it is. So Zvirovo is really just south of Pokrovsk, the main area, under Ukrainian control. It said in that direction, the enemy's attacks are stopped in the same way as in the direction of Udachny. Now it is important to hold the positions here. If the enemy gains a foothold in Udachny, which I'm not 100% sure exactly where that is, it will create a strong bridgehead for attacks to the Dnipropetrovsk region. We must now work ahead of time and attack unexpectedly as the Russians do. This would be worth learning from. Also, east of Myrnohrad, an attack on Yelizavetivka began. The enemy was able to occupy high rises south of the village and destroy our tank with an FPV drone on fiber optics. Serious battles should be expected here. So the kind of direction of just in general, just trying to find where Udachny is, but I'm not quite sure. But in general, what he's saying is that really don't want the you Russians to be advancing too far towards these other oblasts, because then the Russians can say, well, it's not just about Luhansk and Donetsk and Zaporizhia and Kherson, but actually we're in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast and so on and so forth. Oh, there's Udachny. Exactly. So that's exactly the point. So they start getting into here, then you can see these yellow lines, then they're into another Oblast, and they will just use that as a big PR thing. So the Ukrainians will want to really stop them from doing that. In terms of Myrnohrad, that's what he was just talking about as well. I'm just trying to think where the area was he was talking about there. But anyway, they also need to keep the Russians at bay around here. And that somewhere around here, they lost a tank due to a fiber optic drone being utilized. So I just can't quite find. There it is. So this is it. Yelizavetivka. So fighting around there in that kind of direction. They lost the tank. So heavy fighting. They've mainly evacuated Pokrovsk, but as you know from previous places like Bakhmut, people hold on for insane amounts of time and either evacuate themselves at like the worst possible times when, you know, you've got troops and munitions flying all over the shop and ordnance and whatnot, or they hold on for the Russians, or, you know, it's just they're unable to leave. So there will still be people in Pokrovsk, but it is pretty hellish there. And then when we come further to the south, we can see the Kharkiv area is, you know, an area that has seen some fairly significant and quick, comparatively speaking, advances. This is the 24th, this is Christmas Eve, and you can see that the Russians have been advancing in the Kharkiv area. They've got to the power plant there, and they're also advancing to the north and got to this another Shevchenko. Plenty of places in Ukraine called Shevchenko, and are also advancing somewhat up in this direction from the south as well. It's been fairly stable around Velika Novosilka, all things considered. I was expecting that to have been lost already, but that's a sort of Christmas Day time. Some small advances up around this area. It is getting increasingly surrounded. But yeah, what do we have from... Yeah, no urban battles in Pokrovsk. Russians have not reached the city limits, but are trying to capture it through neighbouring settlements. So yeah, they're going for the encirclement. Then, not too much to report along this southern front line. There's just a small game by the look of it around Novopokrovka there, as you can see. That's in the Robotna area. There is still, as you can see, a very rare blue arrow here. There's still activity in Kamyanska, it appears. So you can, if we do a bit of rewinding, you can see that broadly speaking, you know, the river split the town, and then over the course of last month, the Ukrainians took some land there, pushed on in, and that's where we are at the moment. We have a claim from this source from December the 31st, so this is New Year's Eve. Ukrainian armed forces actively shelling houses in the Kamyanska and Zaporizhia area. So there's footage to suggest that, you know, they're actively hammering away at this part, possibly shaping operations before attacking. But yeah, interesting that Ukrainians are pushing there still. And then finally, along the front line, it's worth talking about the Kimburn Peninsula area. We heard this morning that there were complaints of desertions, people shooting themselves in the legs, claiming they've got illnesses they didn't really have to try and get out fighting here, and going on meat assaults. And I presume these meat assaults are attacks with boats in this area, because the Kimburn Peninsula area, you know, is separated by the river estuary, so they're not like doing meat assaults across this this stretch of water. It's likely to be here, so that then indicates that it's very active around here. We've seen a number of boats on Andrew Perpetua's loss lists over the last week or so, and that kind of fits in. It's also worth adding this. Okay, so Null Report says, according to Russian sources, Ukrainian forces are actively bombing the Kinburn Spit. So it's not just Russians complaining that they're having huge attrition from their own attacks, the commanders sending them on these pointless meat assaults where they're trying to get out of them by kind of deserting or, you know, playing injured. On the evening of the January the 3rd and 4th, so last night, 2 nights ago, on the Spit, the positions of our volunteers, that's the Russians claiming this, were fired upon by artillery and then massively attacked by Baba Yaga type copters, so these huge drones. Unfortunately, there are losses among our guys. So the Russians are taking some serious losses here, and it makes you wonder whether the Ukrainians are just doing that as part of what they do, or whether that is a shaping operation. We have seen a number of different attacks on the peninsula, on the Spit, and on the Tendriska Spit as well, Tendra Spit there. that haven't been that successful. One time the Ukrainians lost an awful lot of people and boats, and it was a disaster. Other times it's been like somewhat successful, but they haven't been able to get a foothold there. But you're wondering whether now is a time when maybe the Russians are in low morale. They've been fighting here, not having much success, and then the Ukrainians can batter them with artillery, so artillery can reach across there, but also they can hit them with copters. The distance isn't prohibitive in that way, so we get the there. It's only sort of 15 kilometers, so easy drone within drone range, HIMARS range, artillery range, all sorts. It does make you wonder whether there is an opportunity for the Ukrainians to attack and get a foothold across there, and then give the Russians something to think about. But we'll have to wait and see if that's at all viable. That's enough of an update from me. Hopefully that was of use. Just going to check if there's anything else in the socials concerning the attacks in Kursk at the moment. Something to look out for is that the interview with Zelensky, a 3-hour interview. I think it's out already in Ukrainian. It will be out tomorrow in English with Lex Friedman. That has taken place. It did happen in the end. So that 3-hour interview hopefully will give Zelensky an opportunity to put his case across to an audience in America, particularly, who aren't going to be hugely supportive of Zelensky, I'd imagine, but it depends whether they'd sit through 3 hours of that. So hopefully there are some snippets that can be taken that are really powerful from that. Sorry, just caught this one. This is coming from Null reports showing a Russian BMD getting absolutely hammered near Malaya Lochnia. So that's the latest out from Kursk there. Actually, we can drop into Null reports because since I've been recording this, there have been 2 more. What else does he say? Akhmat, so RIA Novosti correspondent live streamed Russian Special Forces Akhmat, 2nd Special Forces Brigade, and Rodzgvardia's Talib group responding to today's Ukrainian attack in the Kursk region. Ukrainian forces during this attack entered Berdin in the Kursk region. So there's, I guess, confirmation from the Russians that they are in Berdin. And then here is a Russian vehicle blowing up in Malaya Lochnia, just to remind you where both of those places are. So Berdin is here. That's that settlement there. So it looks like the Ukrainians will have this kind of control, and that a vehicle blew up somewhere on the way, probably over here on the way to Malaya Lochnia. It doesn't render Malaya Lochnia, but that's this main area there. These are other smaller villages around it, but they seem to trump Malaya Lochnia in terms of rendering on the map. But yeah, so active still. I'm sure there's going to be lots of information coming out from Kursk, and I'll keep abreast of it and hopefully fill you in tomorrow as the details emerge. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Really appreciate your support. Thanks to Andrew Perpetua for his mapping. What an absolute legend. Thank you for letting me use that, and I better go and fix up my one as well. Thanks to JR, who has been helping out with that as ever. In the meantime, guys, take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Toodle pips.